Well, good day, my friends. We are entering Indiana. Hey there, Joster. So, everybody might be wondering why we took off from Minnesota all the way to Indiana. We got a little bit of bad news. I don't know if we're going to talk about it in this video, maybe the next video, but we had to start making our way east. So we're going to stop off in West Point, Indiana today. Daze with Jordan the Lion and the Joster begins now. For a long time, I would look to see if there was an official grave for the Ultimate Warrior, and I could never ever find one, and now there is. The Warrior's birth name was Jim HELLWIG, and he said that when he was growing up, where he grew up in Indiana, was all the jobs that you would get out of school were all factory or farming jobs. Well, we've made it to the town of West Point. I found that that's where the Ultimate Warrior's headstone is. Here we have made it to West Point Cemetery. I'm just gonna have to look. I have no idea. Okay, so I just drove us in over there, that way. Don't go in there. If you see that, when you're driving in from this road, turn left at the little road before where the West Point gates are. And the great Ultimate Warrior is over here. For a long time. I mean, this guy, oh my gosh. You want to talk about larger than life. Race to the ring, shaking the ropes, going full blast, and would annihilate opponents in like, maybe a minute, 2 minutes. God, what a hero he was to me. Now, I know that later on in his life, he had some unpopular views on some topics, but I know that he rescinded those, and so I'm not going to talk about that stuff. I want to keep this to a tribute about a guy that I was a fan of. And, you know, despite his problems, one of the things that I loved about him the most was, you know, he was like a comic book character come to life. He was like a cartoon come to life. He was like, for me as a young kid born in '81, he was like He-Man amped up to a new level. And even though my dad and I started watching wrestling together and loved Hulk Hogan, when I saw the Ultimate Warrior, I became a Warrior guy. And so it's so good to see that the Warrior finally has a resting place where his little warriors can come and see him, pay their respects. Now, I mentioned that the Warrior grew up out here, and before he was the Ultimate Warrior and before he was legally known as Warrior, he was James Bryan HELLWIG, and he said his whole life changed living in Indiana when he was a freshman in high school. He said he stumbled into the weight room and found this circuit training machine that nobody was really using. He said in those days athletes didn't lift weights or anything. They didn't really believe in that. And so he said he started going in there using it, and he said after like a year and a half, 2 years, he saw a major difference in his body, and he realized that if he could make a big difference in his body that way, perhaps he could do it with his mind as well. And where he said he was very intelligent, he never really applied himself to school. So he said his junior year, actually, he went in to talk to his guidance counselor and told her that he wanted to look into taking classes that would further him to going to college. And he said that, she said, no, what you need to do is you need to go get a job this summer at a factory and then do a good job there. And after you graduate next year, then they'll hire you on. And anything else I can do for you? And he was just like dumbfounded that she had no thoughts that he could have any ambition beyond that. And so he said, set a goal out for himself to do more, and ended up attending Indiana State University, and then became a professional bodybuilder. And actually in 1984, while he was going to chiropractic school, he won Mr. Georgia. So the way that the Warrior ended up in wrestling was that after he won Mr. Georgia, he was coming out to Los Angeles, and Sting co-owned the only Gold's Gym in the San Fernando Valley. And his partner Ed Connors called him and said, hey, I'm sending a guy to work out at the gym, because they co-owned it together. He said, I'm sending a guy to work out the gym and to use the tanning beds. And that's when he met, when Steve Borden met Jim Hellwig. And he said first thing he noticed was that Jim was way bigger than any of the other bodybuilders that were coming to that gym, and that Jim broke the tanning bed the first time he used it. He said he was there for like a week, and then a year later a guy came in and posted an ad looking for 4 guys that wanted to train to be wrestlers, and 3 of the spots were already taken. They were just looking for 1 more, and the ad stayed up there for a while, and then the guy said to Steve Borden Sting, hey, why don't you do it? So he said, okay, I'll do it. The guy was actually paying $2,500 for each guy to do this. So he was going to be paid. And a week in, one of the wrestlers quit showing up, and they said, do you know anybody big that can be our 4th guy? It was they were called Power Team USA, and Steve Borden immediately remembered Jim Hellwig and called him on the phone in Georgia, told him the opportunity, and Jim Hellwig said, I've been wanting to get into wrestling, I'll be right out. And a week later he was out there. He participated in the next 4 weeks of training with the other 3 guys, moved in with Sting at his house, and then once they finished up, they sent out press packets of photos to all the wrestling organizations, and it was actually Jim's idea to do that. And they got a call from Jerry Jarrett in Memphis, Tennessee, saying, well, I'd like to hire 2 of you. And Steve Borden said, which 2? And he said, the 2 on the left of the photo. And it was Jim Hellwig and Steve Borden. So the guys that we would know as Sting and the Ultimate Warrior got their start just like that. They hopped in a car and drove across country to start becoming wrestlers. Now, both guys were bodybuilders, and they were huge, but they had minimal training, and they were hurting everybody that they worked with. They started out as baby faces, and they were hurting everybody, so Jerry made them the bad guys, and they were still hurting everybody. So he said, you know what, I gotta ship you out to someone else where you can get some more practice. And once they got there, they were getting ripped off for their money, and eventually they were running out of money. They didn't have enough for food, gas, rent, all the things they needed. And so they decided to quit who they were working for. And they were told, well, Steve Borden was told, hey, you know, if you come and work, we'll give you your money, and we're done with Jim. We don't want to deal with him anymore. And Steve said, you know, I didn't want to betray Jim, so I called him, couldn't get a hold of him on the phone or anything. So I went because I figured we both needed money. At least I can get some of the money for us. And he said, I went, worked the gig, got the money, and called him on the hotel phone, explained everything to him, told him I couldn't get a hold of him and everything. And he said, Jim said, you stabbed me in the back, man, and hung up on him. And he said, you know, originally we got into this to be a tag team forever. We wanted to be like our own version of the Road Warriors. But he said, from that moment on, we never talked, and we went our separate ways. So it's always said that Sting was easy to deal with and that he was willing to learn, but that Jim wasn't. And when you hear Jim tell the story, Jim says, look, I believe that I had something great, and by listening to my intuition, I developed the Ultimate Warrior, made it a success. And that's the way he looked at it. Like, he saw something, had a vision for what this was going to be, and he wasn't going to let anybody tell him any different. And he said that once he ended up signing with the WWF, for a year, they didn't even put him on TV. They just had him working house shows to learn. He said he was making like hardly any money, but he said he just kept envisioning like this character. And so he said, so the face paint was getting more and more colorful and more elaborate, and the colors of the clothes and everything were getting brighter. And he said that's when he was like running to the ring, and he said everybody, all these old timers were telling me, don't do that, don't do that. And he said every time they would tell me not to do something, I would continue to do it, and the fans and the kids would go crazy. And he said that he credited the genius within him that we all have, and by listening to that, that is what made him a success in wrestling. So eventually his success was undeniable. the fans were going crazy. They wanted to buy all the merch, and he was just squashing everyone he faced. I always remember that famous Intercontinental match where he just runs in and destroys Honky Tonk Man in record time. And he said, you know, he said, I had a vision for this character, and he said, I always looked at this as a business. And he said, I always looked at it with, I had a very strict thing in mind. He said, you know, I wanted this to be a positive character. I wanted it to be like uplifting. I wanted it to be strong. So he said I wasn't going to discount myself. If I felt like I earned a certain amount of money, I wasn't going to accept anything else, and I wasn't going to change the character for anyone. And eventually he became the champion over Hulk Hogan in WrestleMania 6, and he was the biggest star in the WWF, like he always knew he could be. So eventually, from what the company says, they said that when he was the champion, that the shows weren't drawing big enough crowds the way Hulk Hogan was, and so they decided to put the belt back on Hulk. And a lot of people said this made Warrior mad, and so Warrior would come and go from the company several times. But one of the things I always loved about him was that I didn't realize it as a kid. You know, as a kid I just loved that he had all this energy, and he seemed indestructible, and he was so courageous, and there just seemed like there was nothing he couldn't do. But I didn't realize till I was older, everything he said was also positive. He was always reminding you that you could do it, or that he was going to do it. He would always tell you what he was going to do. So when he didn't want to play the game anymore and left wrestling, he basically went into self-help with people who needed help. He had plans for fitness. He would go out and give speeches, and basically what his speeches were about were, like I was saying, he said, everybody has within them a genius. And he said, when you're a little kid, when you were watching me as the Warrior, and your parents were watching and laughing and loving it because you thought you were me and you could do just amazing things, he said, why does that ever have to leave? Why do you ever have to believe you just have to settle for a job or for something? You can do great things. You just have to be you. You have to be original and bring all the things that you have to what you're doing, and you will be a success. And never settle for anything less, and always listen to what's inside. Always listen to the intuition inside you. I just thought that was always one of the things that was great about him. He was always, you know, if you watch any of the things that he posted after wrestling, he was very eloquent. He had a lot of very thought out ideas. And eventually, you know, he had a major problem with the WWE because they just tried to destroy him at different times, where they would make these self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior DVDs and try and humiliate him. And they eventually tried to, you know, repair the friendship or repair the relationship, and for a long time it was never possible. And then eventually Jim Hellwig, who had legally changed his name to the Warrior for business reasons and personal, he said business-wise because he knew that the WWE would try and make it impossible for him to work, and they did have a lawsuit over this, so he legally changed his name to Warrior, as you see right there. But also because he said that was a surname that he was giving himself something to live up to, and something for his family, his wife and daughters also to live up to. And he always just felt like he was a man of integrity and positivity, and was always just trying to pass that along to really anyone that would listen. Now, like I said, I know in the early 2000s, he was out doing speeches and saying things that were highly offensive, but he did, I know, take those back later on. And I feel generally he was always just trying to get people to be better. And then eventually he gave in because he has this, I don't know what it is, everybody that works for the McMahons seems to have this weird respect for them, as though Linda and Vince are almost like parents. And so he ended up agreeing to allow himself to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And Went through the whole weekend of the ceremonies and meeting people and mending fences and everything. And then Monday Night Raw, he came out and gave this huge speech. Just almost like a goodbye. My friend Earl Skakel always says, as soon as he let go all the hate, man, he just knew. He knew he knew that he was going out there to give his last speech. And went out, gave this just amazing speech that really just melted the house down. And flew back to Phoenix and collapsed and died. It was a massive shock to everyone. And like I said, for a long time, there was just like, online, all it would say is his ashes were given to family or unknown. I had went out to where his house was originally when he was wrestling for the WWF and showed where his gym was, and the handprints of him and his signature and Dana Warrior, they're all still there in the concrete. But was never able to come out and pay my respects and share it with all of you. So Ultimate Warrior fans, I know there are so many. He, till the end of his life, went by Warrior. So I will call him Warrior. Thank you for everything, Warrior. Like I said, to me, it was a guy who, when I watched him, made me think just that he could do anything. And when you're a kid and you see somebody like that, makes you think that you can do anything. Got himself out of Indiana. Nothing against Indiana, but he always saw more for his life, more than being a factory worker or a farmer. So it's great that he has such a lasting legacy. I know a lot of people in the business didn't like working with him, but I'll say this, you know, it's always the ones that cause the most trouble that are remembered. And he did things his way, and I don't think anybody can argue that he is not forgotten. He's one of the most popular to this day wrestlers when it comes to merchandise or action figures or anything. They're still using his image to sell products, so he was onto something. He was right. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't find whether his ashes were buried here or whether his wife and children have them at their house, or if he was scattered somewhere, if this is a cenotaph. But to my knowledge, this is the only headstone, the only grave that the Ultimate Warrior has. This is definitely a family plot because you can see, looks like those would be his brothers just based on the time that they were born. He would have been the older brother, born in 1959, and then Jeffrey in 1962 and Jay in 1964. I think this could also be his mother, because I know that he did say that his father abandoned them and never looked back with any kind of financial support or emotional support or otherwise, and said that his mother did a fantastic job of always providing for them so that they never went without. He said always working extra jobs and swing shifts to make sure that her kids weren't on welfare and that they always had something. So hopefully he is buried here and will be next to his mother. Well, my friends, thank you for watching. I know a lot of people that watch this channel are major old WWF wrestling fans, WWE wrestling fans, and so I hope you enjoyed getting to pay our respects to the great Ultimate Warrior. We'll see you all next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.